Previously on Pretty Little Liars.
Hi guys, it's
Lauren Daisy.
Welcome back to my channel, and today we are going to be talking about the Pretty Little Liars podcast. This was a podcast that was started by Tam and who played Jenna, and Lindsay Shaw, who played Paige McCullers. Today we're going to talk about everything. It was kind of a podcast that was caked in drama. Pretty much from the first moment that it was announced. So we're going to go right back to then, all through while it actually was airing, and ultimately its cancellation. I'm excited to talk to you guys about it today and kind of just do a little deep dive into it, because I feel like no one's spoken about this, but it was like a really weird situation. And I'm super interested to know, let me know in the comments, did you guys watch this podcast when it was out? What did you think of it? Also, I went to see Sabrina Carpenter. It was so good. It was so good. Please, if you went, tell me in the comments if you've been to the UK tour or you went to the US tour. Speaking of Sabrina Carpenter, fun fact, if you didn't know this, Sabrina Carpenter was actually a huge PLL fan, and she would like tweet out when she was watching the show. Like, this is like back around kind of like from season 1 to like season 4 or 5. She was like a big hardcore PLL fan and actually was featured on their Instagram a couple times, which is so funny to me. And her favorite character was Allison. So I'm just full of all the fun facts, me, you know what I'm saying? So at the end of 2023, I think it was like October time maybe, Tamin and Lindsay both posted on their Instagram separate videos that was them all dressed in black, and they did the shush. And it was basically kind of, you know, alluding to the fact that they were going to do something PLL related. So naturally, everyone was up in arms, and I'll be honest, I clocked this right from the beginning. I was like, this is going to be a rewatch podcast, because people in the comments were like, are we going to see the original girls? Is this a reboot? Is this a, you know what's happening here? And I was like, absolutely not. It was so clear to me this was going to be a rewatch podcast. There were so many of them going around at the time, still are. There are some that I do really enjoy, and some that I'm not so keen on. I think it seems to be quite a divisive topic. But yeah, immediately I was like, okay, this is what this is going to be. But we then didn't hear anything about it until I think maybe like almost 6 months later. It kind of just went a bit radio silent, and they didn't announce anything, and it seemed like maybe the idea had been scrapped altogether. So then April 2024, they officially announced that it is a PLL rewatch podcast, and it's going to be the two of them, and they're going to be going through episode by episode, rewatching the episode, talking about that episode, and kind of like behind the scenes little, you know, anecdotes and stories, and also interviewing people who had been on the show. So naturally, everyone was kind of very excited about this. We obviously we've had a lot of PLL spin-offs, and we had The Perfectionists, which was again kind of short-lived, but that is now almost 6 years old, I think. And we had Pretty Little Liars Original Sin, which I loved. Those were my baby girls, and that got cancelled way too early. I have a whole video on that. But aside from the little Easter eggs, that was a completely different show. It was a reboot, and it was new characters in a different town. So this was really fun because it was the first piece of Pretty Little Liars media, in a sense, that we had gotten for almost like 6 years, that kind of linked anyway to people that were in the original show. And they kind of made it seem like they were going to be interviewing the liars. They were going to be interviewing, you know, all these people that had been on the show, and we were going to find out all these new fun facts about the show and their time on the show and everyone's experiences. And that was really cool. And I was really excited about it in that sense. I was excited to see people talk about the show after so long, and to hear new stories we hadn't heard before, behind the scenes things. But immediately it was a question of, why are these two the ones who are going to host this? And there's kind of a critique, I think, is maybe being a bit of a sugarcoat on it. I think there's a lot of hate around these podcasts, and people are very outspoken about the fact that they feel when these rewatch podcasts come around, it is a lot of the times not the main characters. It's not people that were really directly associated with the show or like big players in the show. And it is people that haven't had as much work since the show finished. And so they're still kind of riding on the coattails of that previous project that everyone knew them from. And specifically, in terms of that genre of podcast, you have Podco. And Podco is a completely whole other can of worms on its own. I don't even really know what is going on with that company anymore. But it was founded by Christy Carlson Romano, who had been on Even Stevens with Shia LaBeouf, which was a Disney show in the early 2000s. And she had started her own podcast where she interviewed child stars and, people from the Disney Channel. And then they kind of saw, there's always been this, I think, just since the internet has basically existed and social media has existed, that we seem to have kind of switched from sex sells to nostalgia sells. And people love nostalgia. It's a hit of dopamine. I love me some nostalgia. I'm an anxiety girly, so I rewatch shows I've already seen. As you know from my channel, I love Pretty Little Liars, Gossip Girl, shows that have been off the air for a decade, if not more, at this point. And I love anything to do with stuff that I also loved as a kid. I've got my little Powerpuff Funkos here. I have my Pretty Little Liars books, Gossip Girl. I have Chucky, I really love. And John Cena, WWE. I was a big WWE kid. I still love WWE now. Little Lilo and Stitch. Bratz is another one. When Bratz did their reboot, I was so excited. So yeah, I love nostalgia. I love it so much. And I think, we're getting a kind of wave of adults kind of healing their inner child and being able to go back and revisit things they felt forced to grow out of, or things that they loved, or things they didn't even get to experience as a kid, or things they loved as a teen or whatever. I love that. That's me. That's my entire life. With that being said, I do think companies know that. I think they know that it is a way to make money. And so I do think there is an element of that with these rewatch podcasts. I think it's fun. I think it's fun for the actors. I think it's fun for the fans. But ultimately, it is also about making money, because these podcasts get sponsors and they get, views and AdSense and, all this stuff. When it was first announced, it was announced that it was going to be under the Podco company. So, Podco is basically known for this genre of podcast. I don't really know too much about it because this video isn't about Podco. But they have other ones, they had the Wizards of Waverly Place podcast, which was hosted by Jennifer Stone, Harper, and David DeLuise, who played Jerry. And then they also had the Ned's Declassified podcast, which was, if you didn't know, Lindsay Shaw, before she was on Pretty Little Liars, was on Ned's Declassified, which is a show on Nickelodeon. And that was actually one that was one of the rare ones which was hosted by all three main characters from that show. She kind of already had a bit of a relationship with Podco because she was already on a podcast on their channel. And then they launched the Wizards of Waverly Place one. They launched quite a few all in quick succession. And one of those was the Pretty Little Liars podcast. And so right off the bat, like I said, people were a bit confused about why these characters had been chosen as the hosts. I think, obviously, Lindsay did already have a relationship with Podco at the time. And Tamin is very social media forward. She makes a lot of TikToks. She, you know, does a lot on Instagram and things like that. So she did also kind of feel like another sort of obvious choice for hosting, because I don't know, I think a lot of the main actors of Pretty Little Liars are, I don't know, I feel like I just don't want this to be like harsh and mean, and I'm not trying to be, because like Tamin seems very lovely, but a lot of the other actors, it's just, you know, the facts, are doing more. Okay, that's just it. I'm not trying to be a bitch about it, but they are, you know. Lucy does like 2 to 3, no, maybe not 2 to 3, but like 2, you know, 1 to 2 movies a year. She's had a couple like TV shows that she's done, mini series. Like she loves a rom-com. My girl loves a rom-com, and I love her for that. And like same with Sasha. Sasha's like really getting back into acting now. She's, you know, did a Christmas movie. And Janelle, again, similar thing, quite a lot of movies. Same with Troyan, a few movies. She's got her new like Amazon Prime show. And Ashley seems to take on like, I don't know, just really like specific projects and movies and things. So she doesn't do as much acting, but it's all very kind of like artsy and stuff. And she did do an Amazon Prime limited series, and she's also, she's had her baby and everything, so she keeps quite private. Shay is very much, she doesn't really do much acting anymore, but she did quite a lot after the show finished, and now she's obviously a big kind of business mogul with her brand Base, and again, you know, social media and everything. So to me, it makes sense that none of them were going to come back to do specifically a Pretty Little Liars related podcast, because they are very far removed from it now. They're very obviously grateful for their time on the show and what it brought them, and they all speak very highly of it, but it makes sense why they're not going to go back and do a Pretty Little Liars rewatch podcast, if that makes sense. So then once you take out like the top 5, you then kind of have to work your way down from there. And we have, you know, like Ian Harding, Tyler Blackburn, Keegan Allen, like all of the guys. Again, lots of different projects, things going on. It's not giving, you know, podcast. Then we have the parents as well, but the parents really were phased out as the show went on. And I feel like the show was centered around the younger characters. This is such a side note. Maybe I'll do a whole video on the Pretty Little Wine Moms podcast, but the mums did have a podcast. They had a rewatch podcast way back when, during COVID, I think they started it. And I was not able to listen to the episodes before it got taken down. There was a bunch of drama around it, and it ended up being shut down. And not just shut down, like this was cancelled, but everything is so far, everything is still up. Like you can still watch all the episodes and everything like that. No, the Pretty Little Wine Mums podcast is scrubbed from the internet. Like so genuinely scrubbed from the internet. I cannot find it anywhere. There's no clips of it. There is no, like, because they posted videos on their YouTube of the podcast, and they interviewed like everyone. Like that was like serious. Like that was a serious PLL like rewatch podcast. It was kind of before the big boom of rewatch podcasts, and they had Lucy, Troyan, Tyler, Shay, Ian, like they had everyone as a guest on each different episode. And I want to be able to listen to that so bad. If anyone is able to find that for me, I want to watch it so bad and know like what they were talking about. And because I knew that already existed, I knew this was not going to have the same feeling as that, if that makes sense. But yeah, once you eliminate the parents and like the big 5, then next in line is Jenna and Paige. So Jenna was in 49 episodes and Paige was in 45 episodes. Now, considering Pretty Little Liars as a whole had 160 episodes total, we're talking like about a third, like less than a third of all the total episodes. So it makes sense why people kind of thought you're going to be watching episodes that you weren't involved in, like what kind of are you going to be able to share with us, and so on. So that was kind of the first hurdle, as it were. Then there was also a lot of controversy surrounding Lindsay Shaw specifically. I feel like Tammin, as far as I know and have seen since the show finished, has a pretty good reputation. She is quite, well loved for playing Jenna, but also she has done like a Hallmark movie. She's done like a couple things like that. She was also a big Australian pop star before she even got the role as Jenna in Pretty Little Liars. She's done like a lot of soap work and things like that. So, and again, she posts like, kind of like influencer-ish, but more like, I guess, like relatable, like kind of like funny, TikToks, things like that, about her life and her life as a wife and a mom and an actor. So I feel like she had a pretty good reputation going into this, and people were kind of confused why she would want to be associated with Lindsay. Now, Lindsay was actually fired from Pretty Little Liars. Paige leaves in the I don't think it's in the Christmas episode. She like says she's leaving in the Christmas episode, but I think it might be the episode after maybe. But it's in the middle of season 5. And she was let go because she was really struggling with her addiction and weight loss due to that. And the producers decided to let her go. You can see her telling her story of kind of addiction, and specifically about being fired from Pretty Little Liars on the Ned's Declassified podcast. She's very open about that and that experience. And I think, addiction is just such a horrible, horrible disease. And it is such a shame that it, she looks back and it lost her what she considers to be one of, if not the best job of her career. And she's, really regrets how that whole thing went down. But again, she was, a child star and just got wrapped up in that whole world. So I do think it is interesting to hear her, talk about it and share her story. That's not where the controversy comes in. But I just wanted to give you a bit of background. So yeah, Lindsay was let go from Pretty Little Liars in season 5 and then was brought back in season 7 just to kind of briefly finish her character's arc in the show once she was doing better. And Paige, as you will know, if you watch Pretty Little Liars, but also are kind of in the Pretty Little Liars world on the internet, specifically like Reddit, YouTube comments, everything like that, Paige is one of the most hated characters in the show, up there with Ezra. And people just really did not like her. And Lindsay got a lot of hate for that in real life as well. A lot of horrible Instagram comments and things that were really detrimental to her mental health. So there were some people that were just naturally like, oh, I hate Paige. Like, why is she, the one hosting it? All that stuff. I'll be honest, I find all of that to be highly ridiculous. I think an actor is hired to play a character on a show. That should not, like, anything you feel, like animosity you feel towards that character, you should never direct that at the actor themselves. Like, if you hate Ezra, that's fine. Loads of people hate Ezra. But Ian, leave Ian out of it. I love Ian, okay? He's just so sweet. Anyway, so, yeah, that is one thing. That's why you see, like, a lot of kind of hate for Lindsay, because there's a lot of hate for Paige. But again, there is more to the story. So back in, oh my God, I don't even know when it was now. There was basically a dancing, like a dance trend on TikTok that was started by and kind of like popularized by the Black dance community on TikTok. And it became a like bigger trend, but that's where it started and that's where it originated. And then it became a bigger trend. And, everyone, kind of hopped on the bandwagon. And I can't really remember. I have to like insert an example. But I can't really remember what it was about. But it was like, you do the caption, then you do the dance and whatever. And she had commented on, so Devon is he's Ned from Ned's Declassified. They had dated and everything's a little bit weird there. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And that's how, this is not a Ned's Declassified video. There are a bunch of deep dives and looking into Ned's Declassified and the Ned's Declassified podcast if you want to go and watch those for more of like that lore and that tea. But she had basically he had posted it, that trend, and she had like hyped him up in the comments. Then she went and she made a TikTok stitching the dance, but this time it was a Black creator doing the dance. And she was basically saying, like, mocking the dance and saying, like, you know, what is this? Like, what have we, like, come to on this app? Like, this is dancing. And it's all very, like, weird. It was just a really weird thing to say. Two, like, poorly, I don't know, the whole thing was just weird. It was like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you commenting on this? Like, this is so not relevant to you in the slightest. I think she was trying to be, like, funny and relatable, like, but it was bad and it did not land. And so people were really upset about that, and upset at her for that. And I think she ended up making an apology for it, but people were kind of just like, okay, so when your friend does it, it's fine, but then when the actual, like, you know, influencers in this space are doing it, it's not fine. It was all just a bit icky.
Lindsay Shaw decided to stitch a video the other day. The video is that video of the Black creators, dancers who are doing this dance. It has over 100 million views. It's trending nationally right now. And she decided to stitch their video by going, hey, what is this? Kind of discrediting the work that they did, like, how can this video get so many views? Like, what have we come to? But the reason we know that this is a microaggression is because she went onto her friends' videos that were kind of dancing in front of these Black creators and said things like, let's go, like, hyping them up for their videos. So why can't you do the same thing to Black creators? So Black creators were calling her out, and she decided to post on her Instagram stories her crying, saying, like, these aren't crocodile tears, this is my soul, I'm pouring out my soul to you. It was a thing about millennials and Gen Z, I didn't realize it was this serious. Didn't really give an apology. She said, I'm sorry if you took this the wrong way. And then she went on to say that she was quitting social media over this. She has turned off all her comments, deleted that video where she said that thing. The video is still up on Karen if you want to go see it. And didn't acknowledge the fact that this was a huge microaggression towards Black creators.
Hey, are we okay? What the fuck is this?
It just feels so ugly for her to say this.
I see. Okay, I just have to say right now that the hate in my inbox is not okay.
This expression of Black people in this country and the denial of their success and rights. And there is pain there. There is pain there, and I understand it. And this generation, we live in a time where people are standing up for and to that. Next, we have Lindsay making a very unnecessary video hating on the most popular trend on TikTok that happens to be created by Black creators, and getting rather reactionary and defensive in her comment section before deleting the video. And if you know Lindsay personally, you know she's a hater on all sorts of things. Black, white, brown, popular, unpopular, and can be a reactionary and defensive person. But she's also got a good heart and is dealing with personal issues and challenges that none of you know anything about. And can she maybe be a little ignorant and defensive and reactionary? Yeah, but I also love her and will defend her and stand for her success in this life, because that's what you do. And for that, I'm being called racist now. And that's the nuance of our time.
Calling out when I saw her true colors. So to anyone who's saying she doesn't deserve the backlash and isn't a racist, let's get into story time, because I know a little bit about what she stands for and what she believes in. Okay, so back in 2019, I invited a group of girls to come with me to dinner at Nobu Malibu, including Lindsay. And a very kind gentleman offered to pay for this entire dinner. He organized the whole night and even ordered us a car to take to and from Malibu. Lindsay had a little bit too much to drink and became belligerent. After the dinner was over, we all met up with our friend who paid for everything. Keep in mind, this is Lindsay's first time meeting this guy. He noticed that she was very drunk and asked if she was okay, and that's it. And she responded by attacking him, calling him a fucking N-word. Everyone in the entire car witnessed this, including the driver, who was a person of color and got us to and from Malibu safely after we'd been drinking. Lindsay never even thanked the person who paid for this entire night and instead chose to attack him for no reason in a very vicious, hateful, and racist way. So there you have it. That's the real Lindsay Shaw, a true fucking bigot. And unfortunately, this is not the only story.
So there was already that. Then there was a few different controversies in terms of the actual Ned's Declassified pod. Again, there's like loads of other videos and like deep dives into it that are way better than what I'm going to do. But I'm just going to give you the cliff notes. They had made a really weird comment when Quiet on Set came out, which was the documentary about the kind of like abuse and harassment that teen stars had experienced, or child stars has experienced, kind of like specifically on Nickelodeon. And it's, you know, a really well done documentary. It is a very intense watch. So I would just kind of like bear that in mind. But yeah, you know, it was, you know, great for raising awareness and allowing these actors to kind of, you know, speak their stories and be able to talk about that. So it was getting a lot of praise at the time. Now, then the Ned's Declassified, like the trio, as it were on a live stream, and they made a really weird comment. I'll just insert it here so you can see it like word for word what they said.
Daniel, we told you never to speak about that. Get back in your hole, Daniel, and give me your holes. Sorry, we shouldn't joke about this. We really should. Listen, our set was not like that.
Oh, so y'all were in on it.
They were just kind of joking about it, about the Quiet on Set documentary, and it was, again, icky. It was bad. It was just not funny, like, either. Like, it was, I think they were trying, he said it was like an attempt at like dark humor or shock humor or something, but it wasn't. It was stupid, it was disrespectful, it was not funny, and it was really gross. So, again, they were in hot water for that. They then did make an apology, but it was not very well received, and everyone was kind of like, we kind of see, you know, this was live, like, this was you joking around, and you did this on camera, like, what are you guys, like, joking about off camera?
We were on a TikTok live, being asked to comment on the Quiet on Set documentary, which we hadn't seen, and super shit joke came out that was referenced at Daniel and looked like I was talking about Drake, and it all overlaps, and we fucked up. I get it. We hadn't seen the doc, and everyone was asking us for our opinions on it.
On the TikTok.
Yeah. And I get it. Now, having seen the documentary, like, it's so disturbing. I get they were asking,
and we had no clue of the magnitude of what they were discussing. We're also multitasking. I'm sitting there editing the sound. I thought we had lost all of the footage.
Now we've watched it, and I get it. If I had just watched, especially that third episode, and then watched us joking like that,
you would be upset.
I would be like, are they sociopaths? Like actually, like, is something wrong with them?
Mm-hmm. So with that, get it clear, you guys were not speaking on that. You weren't talking about.
No, we hadn't watched. I didn't
it.
know wasn't sitting with the details at all. Like, I know what the joke sounds like, but I was talking to Daniel.
You were
in a way
talking
that we fucking do
to me while I was working. You know, people like, Daniel, you're off camera. What was going on? I'm sitting there at the desk working on audio, super multitasking.
Yeah.
And that statement was directed to me in the extreme way that we disparage each other.
Yeah.
My constituents were just completely upset, and they wanted clear that we were not referring to that.
No, but we fucked up.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
I get what it looks like. I get it. It's overlapping each other in the fucking
Horrible
worst
timing.
way. So
People were kind of getting sick of the Ned's Declassified podcast anyway at this point, for two main reasons. One is that they seemed obsessed with a reboot for Ned's, and they kind of treat Ned's as if it was the most iconic show and it was everyone's childhood. I personally never watched Ned's. That's why I don't have any like connection to it. Like, realized that was the first time I ever saw Lindsay. So I knew that it existed, but I was a Drake and Josh girly. I was a Hannah Montana girly with The Way We Place, iCarly, like that's where I was at. So I didn't watch Ned, so don't matter to me. But they're obsessed with it, you know, getting a reboot, and they're also quite bitter about the fact that it hasn't gotten a reboot, and that all these other shows and all these other things get reboots and they don't.
I just don't understand how Spider-Man can be remade 437,896 times and Ned's Declassified can't even get reboot once. Not even reboot once for a crappy TV movie. Just let us have a crappy TV movie.
I am ready to be a hater.
Everyone's just a bit like, maybe it's time to move on from Ned's. And also, we were fans of it and are watching your podcast, and we also kind of don't really care to see a reboot, and we're the people that actually did watch it. So it's all just a bit like, everyone's getting a bit sick of that. Lindsay specifically then posted a TikTok saying, how can Spider-Man get like 500 reboots or different shows and movies and stuff, and Ned's Declassified can't get one like shitty reboot movie, basically like taking a jab at Zoe 101's reboot movie. And everyone was like, this is crazy. Like comparing Ned's Declassified to Spider-Man. Like, are you serious? Be so for real right now. So again, that was poorly received. It was all just kind of like piling up. And everyone was just a bit sick of them at this point. And the second reason why people were getting sick of their podcast is because people were coming to it for, again, like I said, nostalgia and to hear stories and to see the cast together again and then to watch the episodes. But it very much became about their more personal lives. I think had it been a podcast that was started as just them three, like just them, it was advertised as it's just going to be us three, like chatting about life, and we'll talk about our experience on Ned's, but we'll also talk about other things, and then maybe the kind of backlash for it wouldn't have been so bad. But because it was specifically a rewatch podcast and it was specifically for this show, and they kind of just really go off topic, and what people really didn't like was the focus on more like sexual jokes and things like that. Like the clip that kind of went viral was Lindsay talking about her and Devon's sexual experiences, shall we say. And people were just like, you know, sometimes it's okay not to share things like this. Like sometimes you just need to put down the podcast mic.
Dude, I ran through every Ned's cast member before I landed on Devon.
Damn.
Remember that?
The chosen one. Nothing like me in my hand.
Oh, God.
Pamela Henderson.
Wait. Do you remember the first XYZ?
What are you gonna ask on this podcast? What are you gonna ask on this public podcast, Lindsay?
Do you remember that?
The first what? Which one, Lindsay?
The first one, Devon.
First what?
BJ.
I actually do. You really want to talk about this on the pod?
I just wanted to say that I felt like a failure from that point because
He didn't finish.
I know. Yep.
No.
You didn't. You didn't.
That's kind of a bit of background on why Lindsay doesn't have the best reputation. She also posts kind of like weird, again, it seems to be like kind of trying to be like funny and relatable, but it doesn't work in the same way that Tammins does, because everyone just finds her to be quite unlikable. And so when it was announced that she was the co-host, that immediately kind of turned a lot of people off anyway, to watching it. So it was already kind of, you know, cut off at the knees before they even started. So that was one thing. Then again, before they had even released any episodes, any teaser clips, anything like that, I think, or maybe they just released like a trailer or something, but they hadn't even released their first episode yet, and they were already in hot water over the name of this podcast. They decided to call their podcast the Pretty Little Podcast, which naturally, if you're thinking about Pretty Little Lies podcast, Pretty Little Podcast makes complete sense. But if they had just simply, well, here's the thing. We don't know, and we'll never know, if they Googled it, saw that there was already an existing Pretty Little Liars rewatch podcast called the Pretty Little Podcast, and decided they didn't care. They were bigger names. They had a, podcast company backing them. And so they were just, the name's not copyrighted. So they were just going to bulldoze over it and just take the name from them. Or if nobody at this company and nobody that was involved with this podcast Googled it and saw it. That's what they claim. They claim they never knew that there was another Pretty Little Lies podcast out there that was called Pretty Little Podcast. They claim they never knew it. They never saw it. They had no idea. They just thought the name was cute. And everyone kind of heavily doubts that, because for me, I obviously love Pretty Little Liars. If you were to go on Spotify and look up Pretty Little Liars, they're going to come up. Pretty Little Podcast is going to come up. There are quite a few rewatch podcasts. I was actually just on one. We Are Liars with the Totally Betty Network. So go and give them some love. But there are a lot of Pretty Little Liars podcasts. So it is not hard to look it up and see which names have already been used. We Are Liars, Call It Adult, Pretty Little Podcast. For me, those are kind of like the big three of the Pretty Little Liars podcast scene. And they've been doing it for a long time. If you're going to do a Pretty Little Lies rewatch, I think the amount of time I say Pretty Little Lies in this video, Pretty Little Lies rewatch podcast, you should probably just do your due diligence and Google if they already exist. And if they do, don't steal their name. To me, that seems pretty simple. It's like the whole, this is like a whole nother realm of like the internet, but Jaclyn Hill, when she started her brand Coze, like Cozy, Koze, and another influencer already had a brand called that, but she just hadn't trademarked it. And Jaclyn Hill just came in and stole her name and used it for her own company. And rightly, people were outraged. It's like, if you are ever gonna start a business, start a podcast, start whatever, the first thing you do is Google the name to see if it's been taken. I think that is just pure common sense. Like, at this point, so many names, so many usernames, so many things have been made and created. Just Google it. So that's why people doubt their version of events, that they did not know and it was a simple mistake, because it just seems unlikely. In my personal opinion, it seems unlikely that that was the case. But they posted their promo picture and they were like, this is a Pretty Little Podcast with, Tamin and Lindsay, and we're going to do, rewatch every episode. And so then the comments turned to, what about the podcast that already exists? Also, not to mention that this new podcast had its own TikTok, had its own Instagram as well. So surely when they were looking it up, they must have seen that there was already a podcast that had this username, that was already on TikTok, that was already on Instagram, that was already on Spotify. And they still decided to go ahead with it, thinking they would get away with it, I guess. But naturally, everyone that already knew about that podcast and the podcast creators themselves came for them in the comments of their TikToks and their Instagram. So the creators of the Pretty Little Podcast are two sisters called Caroline and Phoebe, and they've been doing the podcast for years now. And so they were, naturally quite outraged by this, that these two actors who had associations with the show, so naturally had a built-in fan base, were going to come in and basically take their entire brand. And I think it's kind of easy to say, oh, but it's not copyrighted or it's not trademarked. Those things are very expensive. Yeah, I don't even know about like America, Australia, other places of the world, but in the UK, those things are expensive. And so if you're just starting a podcast for fun and you're not really expecting it to turn into a whole brand, or you don't think it's going to be like a company or anything, then investing a lot of money to get these things trademarked isn't really viable. And you kind of just have to hope that nobody's going to come along and steal the name, because it's just kind of like, it feels like internet etiquette. Do you know what I mean? Especially if you are a bigger company than them. It just all felt very shady. And initially, they were deleting these comments. They were deleting any comment that was calling them out and only keeping the ones that were excited about their new podcast together. So when the podcast was announced or like hinted at, Caroline said that she had initially sent a DM to them suggesting that they collab, because they're both going to be Pretty Little Liars Rewatch podcast, and they showed interest. They then used this DM from Caroline as a way to basically defend the name choice and claimed that things were totally amicable between them and the other Pretty Little podcast. Caroline then insisted that that was not the case. They had never agreed to let them use the name, and that was basically not what had happened. And they were upset that, this podcast that, like I said, is, being funded by a company, would overshadow theirs that they've been working on and have like built themselves over the past 2 years.
You see, my sister Phoebe and I have been recording, editing, funding, marketing, everything ourselves for a podcast called The Pretty Little Podcast for 2 years now. We have over 100 episodes. We have a Patreon. We have merch that we've designed ourselves. Like, we have really built our brand from the ground up. Seeing a podcast led by two celebrities with the same name as yours, kind of a bummer, but maybe they're about different things. Of course they're not. They will also be rewatching Pretty Little Liars and recapping it. You have to remember, each of these women have 1 million followers. That's a built-in audience. They don't have to worry about if they're going to have listeners, if their podcast will be successful, because it will be. Not to mention the amount of help that they have, because their podcast is produced by Podco. They have a lot of help with their audio engineering, their editing. They don't have to worry about funding this podcast themselves. They have a team of social media managers. And they were quick to tell me they have a whole production team behind this. So you would think, with a whole production team behind this, that oversights like choosing a name that's already taken could be avoided. And I'll explain to you why this is so tough. Because right now, when you Google Pretty Little Podcast, this is what comes up. That's me and my sister. But once they release one of their episodes, and apparently they've got 12 in the can, you're never going to find us again. Because when you Google Pretty Little Podcast, the celebrity podcast with a built-in audience and a pod network who is there to promote it, yeah, they're going to bury us. Comments got a little too loud, a little too hard to ignore. Tammin started responding, saying things like, it goes through a network that has nothing to do with us. The people on Reddit thought that was really cold and kind of rude. But then she changed her tune. She started saying she would have us on the show because they love their fans. Girl, who said we were fans of you?
Lindsay actually did make a comment about this before they changed the name. And I don't know if she deleted it. I don't even know where she commented it, but I found it on Reddit. So she, I believe, commented this directly at Caroline and Phoebe, at their podcast. So she said, "Bravo, this is a genius marketing move, though we did nothing wrong. If you want to play the morality police over podcasts that truly have different names, please go ahead. If that's going to keep you from watching, okay. Your PLL podcast dreams are already being fulfilled, but enough is enough. We'd love to work in conjunction and even have you on, but okay, let's be mad." Which is crazy. This is crazy because they didn't have different names. Also, she's kind of claiming that they were outraged simply for marketing and to profit off of the views or the hype that this podcast was getting, but it wasn't really getting that much podcast. I don't think it was really getting that much hype. I think the reason people were talking about it so much was because it was now kind of involved in drama. And, saying, "Oh, we'd love to work with you and or have you on, but now, you're mad at us." It was just all very petty and weird. And like I said, already kind of set them off on a bad foot, because instead of just admitting we shouldn't have taken the podcast name, we'll change it. Lindsay then, came with attitude, and people naturally didn't like that.
The showrunner messages us. Hey, this is one of the show producers. So glad you're fans of PLL. Could be fun for our host to share what it was like working on the show. We know there's been some confusion about the name. To be honest, we didn't know there was another show with this name. Too late to change it on our end because we have a whole production team behind it. But it's all good because it's a totally different show. We have true crime detectives and are interviewing the rest of the cast of PLL. And I can't read this because of the recording, but it's something about, like, you guys could come on an episode if you want. Few things. Number one, what confusion? Who's confused? I'm not confused. No confusion about the name here. Been using it for 2 years. To be honest, we didn't know there was another show with this name. So typically you would Google to see if there's one, especially with that huge whole production team behind it. Too late to change it now. You haven't released any episodes, it's actually the perfect time. But it's all good. Yeah, I'll let you know when it's all good. I'll let you know. But I need to point out, nowhere in this message, in my message, in their message, was there anything about, like, us saying, let's have a podcast swap? I just want to make them save their asses, I guess. They pinned this comment on their original post introducing the podcast. Hey, show producer here. To the people in the comments upset about the name, fear not. The Pretty Little Podcast wrote us in our DMs asking us to do a podcast swap, and we think it's a wonderful idea. Well, our show is certainly much different. The actual actresses from the show talking about their real-life experiences behind the scenes, plus forensics experts and detectives talking about actual true crime stories. We'd love to give them as much love as we can. Anyone who's a fan of PLL, we're happy to give some flowers to and promote. Unless, of course, that means they have to hold themselves accountable. Sorry, they dropped the line. Yeah, so I almost was gonna, let this go. I was like, okay, I didn't say that, but I don't know if I want to, keep fanning the flames with this. But then they start commenting at other places, like on Taman's page, on our personal page, all these places, and it's literally just, not true. So, in an effort to control the narrative, I responded. Just said, looks like there's some confusion. We didn't suggest a podcast swap, but it's an interesting idea. We'll get back to your DM as soon as we can. When we didn't immediately jump on that, they deleted all the comments. Literally deleted every single comment that was in support of us. Any comment that acknowledged that, they made a mistake. They even deleted the comments, talking about us reaching out and asking for a pod swap.
This person was connected to them and connected to, or they worked at Podco, I think. It was something like that. Basically, this person who commented this was connected to the Pretty Little Liars True Crime podcast. And they said, why would you get mad at the actors from the show starting a podcast about the show? Why don't you change your podcast name to Petty Little Podcasters? You'd have endless content. So again, it seemed like everyone on the Podco side was being really petty and snide about this, when all Caroline and Phoebe had asked was that they didn't steal their name. So it already, people were didn't like how this whole thing had been handled. And they just kind of came to the realization, I think it took maybe a week or so, because the video that Caroline, I believe it was, had posted basically calling them out with screenshots, with receipts that they have had this name for so long, they then kind of couldn't deny it anymore. And I think that TikTok is up to 200,000 likes or something like that. So it was gaining traction, and they kind of just could not keep up with deleting the comments and ignoring it anymore. And so they then caved basically and changed the name of the podcast to Pretty Little Liars True Crime, and revealed that they were going to have a true crime element to the show where for the last 15 minutes, half an hour, they would talk to a I think he was a death investigator called Joseph Scott Morgan. And so that was the true crime element. They were going to ask him, questions about the more true crime and murder side of the show, and if he thought that it was well done, and, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it then became Pretty Little Liars True Crime. But when you watch the first few episodes, you can tell they were obviously pre-recorded. And so they still call it the Pretty Little Podcast in the first few episodes.
Welcome back to the Pretty Little Podcast, where we recap episodes of Pretty Little Liars.
But they did change their branding, they changed their Instagram handle, and everything like that. And they ended up posting an apology-ish to their Instagram and announced the name change. So Tamin, she made a comment first before she filmed her video saying, "Going to make a statement soon. We listened to your concerns after finding out title information and want to make sure everyone is heard and appreciated. And since our show is vastly different and about true crime and have the original cast and crew on the show, we will now be changing our title to Pretty Little Liars True Crime. I hope everyone feels heard and go and listen to all the PLL podcasts because we love you guys."
Hey, beautiful Pretty Little Liars fans. I firstly wanted to get on here and thank you so much for being fans of the show. If it wasn't for you guys, we would never have gotten to do this show, and to still be talking about it this many years later is just absolutely incredible, and it's because of you guys, and we love you so much. I also want to talk about the name of our show being similar to another name of a podcast, and I just wanted to say that we had no idea until about 2.5 days ago, but we hear you and we know that you're disappointed, and we want to make sure that you feel heard and validated, and we are going to change our name to Pretty Little Liars True Crime because our show is vastly different. We want to make sure the other show gets everything that they want out of their show, and ours is very different. We have crew and cast members from the original Pretty Little Liars come on the show, talk about their experience, and we have the rest of the show talking about true crime as it relates to Pretty Little Liars. So our new name is called Pretty Little Liars True Crime, and yes, go listen to all the Pretty Little Liars podcasts. We love that you're still interested in the show, and hopefully we can have you guys on the show, our fans, talking about what you love, what you wanted to know, any behind the scenes secrets, and we're really excited, and again, we are so grateful for all of you. Mwah!
And naturally, there was two sides to this. There was people that, forgave them and thought they, did really well in handling this situation and praised them for just accepting it, changing the name and moving on. And then there were others that still felt like it was a bit disingenuous and that they had basically tried to pull a fast one and just hadn't gotten away with it. And I think even Caroline herself from the podcast wasn't entirely happy with the way everything went down. She has a lot of TikToks on her actual page, kind of explaining what happened, because I think they did actually speak. I don't know if it was her and Podco, about this. And it all just seemed like it ended and went down very weird. They did end up changing the name. But then, before they had even aired their first episode, they already had two pretty major dramas in the form of who was actually hosting it, and then in the form of the actual name and the branding. So it seemed like it was a bit of it was cursed from the beginning, basically. So the apology video was a little weird. They didn't actually say the name, the Pretty Little They didn't actually say the name, the Pretty Little Podcast, when referring to, they just called it the other show. And they said it was a similar name. It was not. It was the exact same name. They didn't mention Caroline or Phoebe by name, and they also said that their show was vastly different, and kind of said, because we're going to be interviewing the cast and we've got our death investigator, the show is so different. So it was a bit weird, but people kind of were like, okay, well, they've changed it. That's the main thing. So let's just see what this podcast is going to end up being. So that was beginning to mid-April 2024. So they posted their first podcast episode on April 29th, 2024. And it was them watching and recapping the pilot. And this got 100, at the moment now it sits at 190,000 views. So I feel like generally, this is pretty good going in terms of a, YouTube version of a podcast. But in comparison to some of the others released at the time, like the Wizards of Waverly pod, that got over 500,000 views on their first episode. Theirs peaked at 1.1 million with their episode with Selena Gomez. And the Ned's Declassified, their most popular episode is their first episode, and that got 1.9 million views for the first episode of the Ned's Declassified pod. So this was still a good amount of views, obviously, generally speaking, in the podcast world, and especially for a debut episode. But I don't think it also hit the same levels that Podco was kind of used to. So the first episode came out, and I think it was relatively well received. people, you know, found it interesting and again fun that we were getting new Pretty Little Liars content after such a long time. They were releasing them weekly. I think they came out on Mondays or Tuesdays. But yeah, there was a new episode every week. Their second episode is still their most popular episode to date and garnered them the most views, and that is their episode with Sasha. Sasha Peterson, my girl, Alison De Laurentiis. I love her. She is just the sweetest soul. And if you want a bit of a taste of a PLL podcast, kind of like what they were sort of promising, you know, now that this is obviously cancelled, and her podcast is so good. If you want like a bit of that PLL nostalgia, like she interviewed Lucy Hale, she interviewed Troy Belisario, and she interviewed Jenna and Paige. And those are only the ones she's, you know, done so far. But their episodes I really recommend. Also her non-Pretty Little Lies related episodes. It's called Women in the Nude, and it is such a good podcast. 10 out of 10. Recommend wholeheartedly. But anyway, that was their most popular episode, and it was their second episode. So they talked about the second episode of the show, and, you know, interviewed her, and that was a really, really good one. I also think, even it's the highest view, but I also do think it was the best episode that they did. And Sasha's just really engaging, and it was really interesting, and we actually did learn, you know, a lot of like new things, and it was interesting to hear her perspective on things, you know, so many years later. So then we kind of like chopped and changed. So we would have some episodes that were just those two recapping the episode, and then obviously every episode had the true crime segment at the end. So we would kind of alternate between those episodes with just Tammin and Lindsay, and then we would have guest episodes. So they ended up interviewing Sasha. They also interviewed Tori DeVito, who played Melissa. Brad Doherty, I think is how you say it, who played Noel Khan. Mandy Line, who was the costume designer from seasons 1 to 6. She's an icon. She's a legend in the PLL world. Sarah Shepherd, who is obviously the original author of the Pretty Little Liars books. Hugh Collins, who played Archer Dunhill / Elliot Rollins. And then their last guest was Vanessa Ray, who played Cece Drake. For me personally, the guest episodes, they were my favourite episodes because I love to hear everyone's different perspectives and their interactions with the other cast and what they thought about their character and what they thought about the show overall. That I find to be really interesting. So those for me were the best episodes. And it ran for 24 episodes. So they got up to the season 1 finale. And then I think they watched episodes 1 and 2 of the second season. I think that's correct. Yeah, it was like just 24 episodes. And then Podco decided to cancel it. Now, there was quite a bit of critique early on with the podcast that it was not focused enough on Pretty Little Liars. And like I mentioned, I think this is why the Ned's Declassified podcast suffered as well, because people are there for the show. Like that's the harsh reality of it, is that for a lot of fans, they aren't really there for you. Like some of them are, and that's great. And to hear your experiences and all that stuff, but it's to hear your experiences about the show, and it's because you were in the show and they want to hear about the show. That is why they are there. And the critiques came that there was just a lot, for a recap podcast, like a rewatch recap podcast, they did not really talk about the episode at all. Really, they didn't share too many behind the scenes stories, because a lot of these episodes, I feel like Jenna less so, she was in like quite a lot of obviously season 1, but a lot of these episodes they weren't in, so they don't have a lot to share about the episode or stories to tell about the episode. And the recap parts were very short, and people felt a lot of it was focused on Tammin's life as a mum and Lindsay's journey with addiction, and there was a lot of talk about stuff like that, which is absolutely fine. If you want to do your podcast and you want to talk about yourself, absolutely, you're well within your rights to do that. But where there was the pushback from fans was that that's not really what was advertised with this podcast, and that's not really what they came there for. They came there to talk about Pretty Little Liars and to hear about Pretty Little Liars, and you didn't get a lot of Pretty Little Liars in this Pretty Little Liars podcast, basically. And because the first, I don't even know how many it was actually, maybe the first 6 or the first 8 had already been pre-filmed and they were just releasing them, they couldn't do anything about that. Like, this criticism was basically there from like day one, with exception to the Sasha episode. And so the comments were kind of there from that moment, but they couldn't do anything about it because they had already pre-filmed these episodes. They were just gonna come out. So then, yeah, I think it was after 6 or 8 episodes, they had then obviously started filming them again, and they could look at the feedback from fans and respond to it. And they did. And it wasn't the best response. Again, I will just put the clip so that you guys can hear kind of like word for word what was said.
I said that I think that people want more of the show.
Right.
And I do understand that because you have been burnt by certain people in the comment section. You do spend some of your life in there.
Right.
You were like, we cannot bend over by just people having opinions. And I'm like, yeah, but you also have to listen to your audience.
Basically talk for 12 hours straight for 2 days.
Yes.
Right.
And that's why we can't also fix things like straight away. People are like, why aren't you fixing it? And I was like, we hear you. You're so loud on your text.
Yeah. Whatever is in the pipeline is going to go for that 3 months.
It's going to go for 3 months. But we have listened.
But we have listened.
We have listened.
And we are going to bring you more of the rewatch. We're hearing what you're putting down. What you're screaming.
We hear you're screaming, Pretty Little Liars. We get it. Because sometimes people don't actually like to talk about the show the entire time.
Right.
But these fans are different.
Yeah.
They didn't seem very receptive to the feedback. They seemed somewhat annoyed by the feedback a little bit. Just for me personally, that was the vibe that I got. And fans, naturally, didn't really appreciate that. And so they were already on the back foot a little bit. But they said they were going to try and do better with it, which didn't really happen. At least from me watching, because I watched every single episode. Like, I was there when it came out and I watched it. And I do have to agree with the comments, and that's why I did enjoy the guest episodes more, because those felt more focused on the show, because the guests knew they were there to talk about Pretty Little Liars, so they talked about Pretty Little Liars. Whereas it seemed like Tamin and Lindsay just kind of wanted to talk and just have a podcast, which again is absolutely fine, but it's just not what we all signed up for, so it was all just a bit like, ugh.
My question was, do you have a long or a short taint?
I don't know.
I mean, you don't know. You can't feel it?
You feel your taint a lot?
No, I don't feel it, because honestly, touching that area makes me really uncomfortable. Like, I don't even...
So anyway, the views then kind of dwindled as time went on. So we have, the Sasha episode, like I said, 548,000. Then the next episode, which was just those two, had 100,000, which is still good. The Tori DeVito episode has 104,000. Then for episode 5, we drop way down to 56k, 44k. And even then the guest episodes started to dwindle a little bit as well in views. The one with Noel got 63. The one with Sarah Shepherd got 45. And like, these are still good views. Like, like, look at my channel. I'm not knocking those views. Like, those are still really good views. But we're just obviously talking in comparison to their first episodes. And also, I think the other podcasts, like the Wizards Where We Place one and the Neds one, were getting higher views as well. So for their last few episodes, episode 20 got 16k views. Episode 21 got 20, episode 22 got 19, and episode 23 got 15k. And then their final episode was the one where they interviewed Vanessa Ray, Cece Drake, and that got 29k. And that was the last episode that we saw. And I had noticed that they hadn't posted. It had been, you know, we'd gone round, Monday had passed, Tuesday had passed, and they hadn't posted anything. And I was kind of interested. I was like, what's kind of happening here? And I think it took a couple days, but then Tamin and Lindsay both took to their Instagram stories to say that they would no longer be working with Podco, and the Podco had decided to end the Pretty Little Lies True Crime podcast after 24 episodes. And it's interesting because with this one specifically, it does seem like maybe it just was not as beneficial for them. I think they did start to get a few sponsorships, but it didn't seem to be that many. Like the Wizard Waverly Place one, that was like advert after advert. Like they had sponsorships every single week. I think even multiple sponsorships sometimes, whereas it did not seem to be that same way for the Pretty Little Liars one. And people did assume that was because of Lindsay. And so it wasn't getting as many advertisements and it wasn't getting as many views. So it did kind of seem not overly shocking that they would have cancelled it. But I did think they would probably get further, like into like at least maybe the end of season 2, instead of just, it was just so abrupt. It was, yeah, I think like the second episode of season 2, and that was it. We were done. So abrupt. They literally just cut it. And it was done. And there was no real other explanation about it. They didn't post a video on the YouTube or on the official Instagram or the TikTok, like a statement or anything. It was just Tamin and Lindsay's personal Instagram stories, and that was it. So if you look at the Pretty Little Lies True Crime YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, all of their like final most recent posts are just promoting the episode with Vanessa Ray. And that was it. So the last post on the Instagram was the 9th of October 2024, and they have not posted on it since. And like I said, they never said like a goodbye or gave any kind of explanation. There wasn't even like a community post or anything. It was all very weird. And I started looking into some of the other ones, and a similar thing was happening with those as well. And it seemed like Podco as a whole was maybe struggling because, yeah, the last Pretty Little Lies True Crime one was about 5 months ago, and that's the same with the Wizards of Waverly Pod one. Their most recent episode was 4 months ago. Then they also launched a Full House one, and I don't even think that did that many episodes, but then that also has not been updated for 5 months. And the Podco website is basically just down. There's nothing you can, it's just like a screen with a TV on it. You can't read or look at anything on it. Their Instagram hasn't been posted on since September. And Christy Carlson Romano and her husband, who were like the founders, I think, or like ran Podco, they took it out of their bios on Instagram. They haven't posted about it. It's so weird. It literally just went ghost. Like something fell apart behind the scenes and they just decided to never speak about it. And it's so weird. Like, yeah, David DeLuise, Jennifer Stone have taken the podcast out of their Instagram bio. Same with Dave Coulier, he did the Full House podcast. All of them have just removed it. All of them have just removed it from their Instagrams, wiped it, and have just never seemingly spoken about it or addressed it. It's so weird. Yeah, so the Wizards pod said, Wizard fans, the Wizards of Waverly Place pod is pausing time for a bit, but don't worry, it's not goodbye. It's just a quick trip to the Wizard lair to recharge our magic. We want to say a huge thank you to all of you, our amazing fans, for making this journey so magical. Stay tuned, keep the magic alive and stuff, but nothing has seemingly come from that since then. And the Ned's Declassified one is interesting because they are the only ones that have actually publicly like spoken about this really. They said that they have moved on from Podco and they are going to reboot their podcast by themselves and fund it by themselves. They have, I don't know if they have a separate channel or if they're allowed to use the same channel, but they basically have said, we're going to do this on our own.
Ned's Pod is going through a change right now, and we kind of have been, so...
we're under new management.
Yeah, it's us now. Ned's Pod and Podco, we are breaking up amicably, right?
Yeah, we love them.
We're all going in different directions. They're dropping some shows, so we are now production company-less, but...
We independent.
Yeah, which is cool. But it also means we have a lot to figure out in the next coming months. We definitely want to continue the pod in some form. We got to figure out what that looks like. Yeah. And so stay tuned for details for that.
But that is not the case with all of these other ones. And I don't really know why that is. Maybe it's just because Podco were paying them to do this podcast. And now that the income isn't guaranteed, they don't want to do the podcast anymore. Whereas the Ned's Declassified, as we know, are highly invested in Ned's Declassified. And so there's more incentive for them to keep going and keep doing it by themselves, not funded by Podco. So this is what Tamin's Instagram story said. It said, "Dearest Pretty Little Liars fans, after some discussion, the Podco has decided to go in a different direction and put down..." Like that wording is crazy. Put down the podcast A Pretty Little Lies True Crime. There is a world where we could continue the show on our own in the future, but as of now, there will be no new episodes of the show. We are grateful for Podco giving us the opportunity and for all of you fans. We love you guys and are heartbroken too. Hopefully we can pick this up in the future. Stay tuned. But there's been no mention of it since then. I feel like, again, this is going to come out harsh and I don't mean for it to, but people start podcasts every day, and the Pretty Little Liars existing rewatch podcasts are just people that love the show and want to watch it, and, you know, or are just YouTubers, like people that just want to make content and want to talk about the show and are excited about it. They just make it. And they have patrons and they have different things to support themselves. And it just seems like now that it's not officially under a brand, it is not worth it to these hosts to keep doing it, because they could easily do that. Like they could easily hire somewhere or go around to each other's houses and just film a podcast, like just keep it going. But this has been, basically radio silence. They have said about continuing it, but that nothing has come of that. And it doesn't even seem like Tamin and Lindsay interact that more, like really any amount on social media since this. And to be fair, like Paige and Jenna never really, I don't even know if they had any scenes together, maybe like one or two, but that was kind of it. So it was kind of built on these two these two hosts being thrown in because they were willing to do the podcast, but also you didn't get that like repertoire and that kind of like bouncing off of each other that you have with a lot of other podcasts where the people that host them are genuinely friends. And so you kind of feel that when you watch the podcast, you hear like their banter and that kind of thing. And I think that's also kind of what was lacking from the Pretty Little Liars podcast, is you could tell that they were not friends. No, they weren't friends, but they were colleagues, which is fine. But I think you do lose a bit of a charm with that like podcast when you're watching it.
I don't think people really know this, but we batch episodes, so we haven't seen each other in 3 months.
So yeah, that was what Tamin said about it. And I don't think, as far as I've seen, please let me know in the comments if you've seen, I don't think she has spoken about it since then. And yeah, I just think ultimately because they weren't in all the episodes or like a core part of the show, they didn't have that much to really talk about or add to with it. They had some like really interesting things, but it was when the guests would come on that were more involved and more integral to the show that they then shared, you know, the more interesting stories. And I think what people really wanted from this podcast, it just kind of didn't live up to that. Also, people kind of weren't really interested in the true crime element. I saw a lot of comments, and I can't lie, I I did the same thing, where he would seem like a really sweet guy, Joseph Scott Morgan, and it was interesting. But for me, that's just not what I was there for. So I would stop watching the podcast when that segment started. And I think a lot of other fans did the same thing, at least from like what I've seen on Reddit and in the comments. Also, when they were doing the recaps of the episodes and they were talking about the episodes, fans also didn't really like their commentary of it. And I do kind of have to agree, there was some moments that were just a bit strange. Like they referred to Spencer as a homewrecker in regards to the Ren situation and her being with Ian, when I think most people that genuinely watch and are invested in the show and care about the characters know that that is not the case and that Spencer was preyed on by both of them. So that again was just kind of like icky. They also didn't really acknowledge the fact that Jenna assaulted Toby. The way they kind of talked about it, they just kind of like poked fun at the fact that like, oh, I was, you know, dating my brother or like stepbrother and stuff. And it's like, you can just tell they didn't have a connection to the show.
Because we're rewatching the show in real time.
I'm not rewatching anything. I'm watching the show.
That's true.
When you hear Sasha or Troyan or Lucy talk about the show, they talk about it with such love for it. And they were so, you know, it's just such a like part of them and their history. And I think because Lindsay had obviously left and already was kind of infrequent in the show anyway, she doesn't have that deep connection with it. And same with Tammin. And that's not their fault. That just is the reality of it. They just weren't in it as much. And you can tell when they watch it, they don't care about the characters. They're not invested in the characters. And I think that's why I do just love like the Totally Bae We Are Liars podcast, because they know the characters, they're invested in the story, they're talking about it. When you listen to them talk about it, they have interesting commentary and they have, you know, views of people that actually watch this show and enjoy it. And you just didn't get that with them. Also, it was just like the guests were really interesting, but the way that they would interview them was kind of a bit weird. Like with Tori's one, like at one point, I think they just started talking about like Lindsay's like feet and how they sweat and stuff. And she was talking about how she like uses Cameo to like sell like feet video or something. It was just weird. Like, you know, things like that and kind of jokes that didn't really land, like with the guests and stuff. And it all just felt a bit awkward. Like they weren't really like interviewers. I think being able to actually interview someone is quite a skill and to keep it, you know, a good like repertoire and then that with them going. But because they didn't really watch the show and they hadn't gotten up to like when they interviewed Hugh, they hadn't seen his seasons yet. So they didn't really have a good grasp on what happened with his storyline and him and Allison. So they didn't really ask him the kind of questions that PLL fans wanted to hear.
Oh,
it was a great
and
role.
Why? I forget what?
She's like,
I'm sorry, I didn't watch the show when it was happening. I just came in. You know what it was like to just come in.
For backstory, Lindsay,
please.
You know, I came in as an American doctor. I was Allison's doctor, and I was working with Charlotte.
Working with A.
I was
oh my gosh, I
with,
literally can't wait to get to these episodes.
Will you A for a second?
Who I'm talking about.
And so it just kind of fell apart. And there was also another time where they had talked about Ashley Benson and Lindsay had mocked the fact that she was upset. It was a Halloween episode, and I think it was a Halloween episode, and the producers had asked Ashley to stay later than they had originally said. And she was upset and she cried because she was missing a date. And they just kind of mocked her for that and laughed. And like Lindsay was, you know, like mocking how she was crying. And again, when you already are on thin ice with the Pretty Little Liars fandom, who are the people that are watching this video, you know, as well, and that are supposed to be supporting your podcast, and you then come for not only the most, probably arguably like her and Spencer, the most popular characters in the show, but also one of the most popular actresses from the show, that was just never going to end well. And that really went viral on TikTok with people not being happy with her.
Oh my god, do you remember the Halloween episode where she was asked to stay over her call, right? Like, we're going to push her call or whatever. Yeah. She starts crying. This isn't fair. I don't want to do this. Oh my god. One story that I remember from Shay early on, she is getting up there to do her speech on that episode. I guess she might have been having a little trouble, and she's like, they were laughing. Like, they were full on laughing while I was up there trying to give my speech and do my thing. She is so strong. She was never intimidated by any of that, and I feel like it's because she started acting in her 20s. She knew who she was. She was like, psh, they were all like laughing. She didn't hold a resentment. She still worked with them professionally. She didn't think anything less of herself.
Right. Do you think it could have been an accidental coincidence, or do you think it was very directed?
Here's the thing.
So it was just a weird recipe. Like, I think in concept, I think it was so cool. Like, the idea of, a rewatch by people that were on the show, or even if it wasn't by people that were on the show, people that loved the show would have been really cool. And just being able to interview people that were on the show. Like, the idea and the concept was there, and I think it could have been so, so good. But the execution was just really poor, and I think it was just right concept, wrong hosts. It seemed like there might have been specifically beef between Christy Carlson Romano and Lindsay Shaw, because while Tamin had said, we had after a discussion, we decided to not go forward with the podcast, Lindsay seemed a bit more shady in her response, and she posted this TikTok, but it was different like comments. So it was like, you've been cancelled, you've gone off the rails. And it was basically her kind of like mocking those and like, showing that she wasn't really fazed by them. But the interesting ones are, you're hard to work with. So people were maybe like, okay, is this about Christy? Is this about Tamin? Like, was there some kind of other breakdown about this podcast behind the scenes, rather than it just being that it wasn't doing as well view-wise?
We had a fight. I had to throw down like...
She had to talk to me like...
I said I will not be spoken to like that, but I'm happy to address your concerns.
I said, because Tamin is more hands-on on the pod than I am, which...
You do the pod and then you go live your life.
Yep. For better or for worse, those are just our styles, right?
I'm like, let's make this successful.
Right. And she's like, hey, let's put in the work each week to make it successful.
Yeah.
And
let's do the work.
I did that work in those 2 days.
I don't know if you did, but it was all caps.
I will take the micro. I was like, you micromanage everything. Like,
it was just very loud.
Yeah.
And I was like,
whoa.
I'm just
chill the fuck out. And I go, what do you mean chill the fuck out?
I said, take a breath or something like that, which is what I do with my kids. Just take a breath.
And then finally, she said, I can't answer your valid business questions professionally, so I'm going to attack your character, even though none of these have kept you from doing a stellar job on your end of the bargain. So it seems like, just from interpretation, obviously all this is like alleged, I don't know, no one said anything, like no one has really commented on anything, but it seems like she had questions, maybe, I don't know, about pay or about the future of Ned's Declassified pod and the Pretty Little Liars pod, and Christy or whoever she was speaking to at Podco was not very receptive, and it seems like your end of the bargain. So these podcasts must have been, there's some kind of contract in place here where they provide the studio, they provide the equipment, they obviously do all of the managing of the social medias and everything, and they film them, they edit the podcast, like all the actors do and the hosts do is just come to set, sit down, have their conversation, and like maybe film some clips for social media, and that's where their job ends. They're basically like almost like freelance, like just hired to be the host. These aren't their podcasts that they own. So that's kind of, I think, what it means by bargain is like on Christy and Podco's side, they obviously will take a big cut. And the other end of the bargain is that the hosts get the exposure, they get to sit down and they talk to, the guests, and they get, a bit of a publicity from doing the podcast. And she's claiming that she, did a stellar job of hosting these podcasts. But when she went with business questions to Podco, Christy, I guess, or whoever it was at Podco, attacked her character, said, potentially all these things, you're off the rails, you're cancelled, you're hard to work with, in response to that. And that's kind of how this whole breakdown happened. And the Neds one got cancelled and the Pretty Little Liars one got cancelled. And then maybe they just didn't see Podco as a viable business venture anymore. And that's how the Full House and Wizards ones also got cancelled. Because I think Christy Carlson, I think she still does her own podcast. And I think she might even host another one. Like, I think she might have 2 podcasts, and I think those are still going. So it doesn't seem to be an issue with her podcast, just the ones that she was funding and licensing. But she turned off the comments on this specific one. So it's kind of hard to know. She's never going to say that it was about them, but it's kind of insinuated considering she posted this, like, I think on the same day as Tammin posted her statement. And I don't remember, I'll be honest, I don't remember, and I can't find a screenshot anywhere. If anyone has a screenshot of it or remembers what her specific statement was, I, for the life of me, cannot remember if she actually released a statement or if she just posted this shady TikTok and that was it. So it seems like she hasn't posted, I think she posted an Instagram story at the time, but I just, for the life of me, cannot find a screenshot of it, and I do not remember what she said. But after that, she did post a couple of shady TikToks, and so people thought maybe something was going down. So that's basically it. Like, as of now, the Pretty Little Liars True Crime podcast is no more. Like I said, I don't know if Lindsay mentioned restarting it. I can't remember. Like I said, I cannot for the life of me remember her statement, but Tammin's statement did say that they would maybe pick it up again in the future. I personally, just from, you know, how this whole thing has gone down, I don't think that's going to be the case. I can't see them restarting this again. I think the 24 episodes we have now are the 24 episodes we're going to get. But it is interesting because it did seem to be a really sharp cancellation, because in one of the episodes, not even that much longer before it was cancelled, they had mentioned being excited to watch the entire 7 seasons. And they had also talked about watching the Ravenswood spin-off, the Perfectionist spin-off, and the new reboot, The Original Sin. They had talked about recapping all of that. So they were planning on, I mean, if you include all of them together, we're talking like 200 episodes of TV. So they were expecting to do about 200 podcast episodes, and they only got up to 1/10 of that. So it did seem like they were really, you know, expecting this to go places, and then it all just seemed to crumble. And then they released the last few episodes they had, and then Podco never invited them back in to film more. Or yeah, maybe Lindsay and Christy did get into some kind of argument, and Lindsay has decided that the Ned's Declassified pod is more beneficial for her. So that's the one that she will be continuing and funding with the other 2 guys. And the Pretty Little Liars True Crime one has just kind of fallen to the wayside. No one has spoken about it. No one has, you know, addressed it or anything like that. I think it was really fun. Like I said, the concept of it, I just don't think it was executed very well. I think the cast, like guest ones, are interesting and are worth a watch. But like I said, I would 1,000,000% recommend Sasha's podcast. And also other podcasts that the actors have done. They do, you know, get asked about Pretty Little Liars a lot. So they've done a lot of podcasts. There's also the Bros Watch PLL2 podcast, which has had Troyan on a couple times. And obviously that is Pretty Little Liars focused. Lucy Hale has done like the Jake Shane podcast. Troyan was on Sophia Bush's podcast. Sasha was on Trevi Moran's podcast with her. So I feel like there's a lot out there if you do want PLL content in podcast form. Maybe I'll make like a playlist of every time a PLL character has been interviewed on a podcast for you guys, because it is out there. And yeah, I just think it's a shame because I don't think, at least anytime soon, we'll see someone attempt to do this again. But I do think with the right people or just in the right scenario, this could have worked really well. But let me know what you guys think. down below. Did you watch this? Did you like it? Were you, were you upset that it was cancelled? Who do you kind of wish they would have interviewed? Who was your favorite guest that they did interview? And yeah, I will see you guys in my next video. Yeah, bye guys.